This is a night that's been 16 years in the making for me, personally, and the museum. I started working on Andy Warhol in the West in 2003, when I first started working on my graduate level degree at the University of Oklahoma. And I have a number of thank yous I need to make, and I know I'm going to leave somebody out that I should thank. So in advance, thank you to everybody in the room for all your support on this project if I don't mention you personally. First and foremost, my family, Joyce, my lovely wife, for her support throughout all the years, not only working on this project, but for everything at the museum. I appreciate all that she does for me. And my kids, my 4 kids, they make up the Haas Fund. You've heard of the Haas Fund. Hadley, Alex, Ansley, and Stephen. And they all at various times have said, Dad, it's going to be okay. And Hadley's here with us tonight, so I appreciate that very much. You go, Had. Our board of directors has been very supportive of me throughout the entire time we've been doing this, from building the building through this project. And they deserve a lot of thanks as well. My mentor on this project and my thesis advisor was Byron Price. He's the head of the Russell School, the Russell Center for Western Art at University of Oklahoma. And I guess I owe him. When I got the first draft of my thesis back, it looked like he had bled on it. I've never seen so much red ink in one place in my life. And it was 110 pages. There wasn't one page that didn't have at least 3 places there was red ink. But it made it stronger, it made it better, and it made it what it is tonight. So I appreciate Byron for his help and support. And to Jim Ballinger, who is the director of the Phoenix Art Museum. For many, many, many years, he was here giving a talk at the museum when I was first trying to decide what to do my thesis on. And we were having dinner and talking about various topics, and he said, if you don't do the Warhol thing, you're an idiot. Well, I didn't want to be an idiot, so here I am. I sent Jim a book the other day, and I said, look what you have wrought. But appreciate his support over the years as well. And then the incredible staff here at the museum. Lisa Wheeler took my vision that I had in that thesis, and she made it come to life and then some up in the exhibition. Just a fantastic job with the colors and the layout and the way things are displayed. And she's had the help and support of a lot of other people, Nikki and Liz and Sam and Christy in our curatorial department, Richard and Chad who do the lighting up there, which is spectacular, Diane who makes sure we raise the money to be able to pay for these things, and Lynn and Kathy who support Diane and I in all our endeavors. So how about a big round of applause for staff. And again, I know I've left somebody out I should have thanked, but it takes a village. It really does for something like this. I always say, you've heard probably that you shouldn't see 2 things being made: legislation and sausage. I add to that list museum exhibitions. It's a sticky business, but we have endeavored through it, and I think we've put together a wonderful exhibition, which we couldn't do without the lenders. That includes private collectors who you'll see recognized throughout the exhibition and in the book. And particularly some of the other museums we worked with, the Andy Warhol Museum in particular. About 1/3 of the material in the exhibition is from them, but some other great lenders as well. And particularly to the private individuals, you know, to ask them to give up their treasures and to entrust them to us for a 1.5 years that this tour is going to last, and to have them not have their treasures is really a pretty big deal. I never thought so too much until I wanted to borrow one of the paintings that Joyce really likes out of our house, and she cried bloody murder. So then we found out what it was like. Also, staff from Columbus State University and Kennesaw State University were helpful at various stages in consulting and also creating the demo of the silk screening process that you see upstairs. The young students, some of those who made that display, were here last night for our opening, and it was really cool to see them being excited about their work being on the wall here in the museum. So how about a round of applause for those folks? In the exhibition, you see a list of all the sponsors, and they're up here on the monitors, and we couldn't do it without them. Literally, we could not do it without them. And particularly on this project, the most expensive, most complicated, most extensive thing we have ever done in 15, 16 years here at the museum. And the lead sponsor on this was Don and Neva Roundtree. They put a challenge grant out there in front of their fellow members here at the museum and said, come on, let's get this project going, get it off the ground. And we were successful in getting all of their money matched and getting most of this exhibition paid for. We still need to turn the turnstiles to get the rest of it, but we couldn't have done it without them and the other sponsors. So a round of applause for them too. So we knew this was an exhibition we could not do by ourselves. We was going to take some partners, and we cast the bread upon the water, and we found two wonderful partners that came on board with us. The National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and the Tacoma Art Museum in Tacoma, Washington. Staff from those two institutions, particularly Melissa Owens and Michael Brower from the Cowboy Museum, and Faith Brower, who's here with us tonight from Tacoma, did yeoman's work on this exhibition. We really divided it up into three pieces. We tried to play to the strengths of each of the museum. A lot of the work in the exhibition belongs to us, and so we were kind of responsible for gathering it all together, finding things that we didn't have and how to get a hold of it. The Cowboy Museum took on the logistics, insurance, shipping, packing, crating, moving, transportation, loan forms, dealing with the lenders and all those things, which I sure didn't want to do. And Melissa Owens at the Cowboy Museum is incredible at those kinds of things. And then Faith and her staff out at the Tacoma Museum put together this wonderful book that's over on the table, and they did a great job with it, working with the University of California Press. So that's how we divided it up. We all agreed that we would pay an equal share of all the costs, and we would all put that sweat equity in those areas. And it has been a wonderful collaboration. So, with that said, I'd like to begin the proceedings this evening by having Faith come up and join me on stage and talk just a little bit more about how we pulled this exhibition together and some of the challenges in doing so. So, Faith, how are you?
I'm doing well, Seth. Thanks. How are you doing?
Good. So, what was your first reaction when you saw the exhibition yesterday?
I was so thrilled with the exhibition. You and your team did an incredible job, and I hope you've all had a chance to see it. It is just thrilling to see so much of Warhol's work here and seeing so much new work contextualized with the American West. So, very exciting moment.
And then you also had the panic attack of how are you going to fit it in half the space in Tacoma?
That's true. That's very true. I am quite envious of all the amazing space you have here at the booth. And at Tacoma Art Museum, we will be trying to squeeze this all into 3,500 square feet. So please wish me luck, and then please join us for the opening next summer in July.
Yeah, that'll be a good time to have it here about 4 months and take 8 months off, and then we'll go out and revisit it out there and see what they've done with it. I think that's going to be interesting to see. What was your first interest in the project, and how did you find out about it, and how did we get here?
Yeah, great question. So about 2.5 years ago, Seth thankfully was reaching out to a number of Western art museums throughout the U.S., and we received a letter from him inviting us to participate in the project. And when we received that invitation, we were overjoyed, because it is not every day that you get to work with a household name like Warhol in the Western art world. And we knew our audiences in Tacoma would be thrilled with this exhibition. There's a lesser known fact about Warhol's art, and he had created a beautiful illustration and painting of a flower that was supposed to be placed on the roof of our Tacoma Dome, and unfortunately it was never realized, but ever since that moment in the 70s, Tacoma has had a real interest in Warhol and his work. So this work, his Western art, speaks to our own Western art collection and our own interests in Warhol, so it was a no-brainer to move forward with the project.
And the Western art portion of your collection is relatively new. You're kind of the new kids on the block in the Western art world. Tell folks a little bit about that if they get to visit, what they would see.
Yeah, that's right. In 2014, we received an incredible collection from the Haub family, German collectors of Western art, and they gifted us an incredible endowment that allowed us to increase our gallery space and 300 works of art. So incredible Western art, including some big names like Bierstadt and Moran, some names that you're all familiar with here, Ed Mell, Billy Shank, and the Taos Society of Artists and everything in between. We have a beautiful catalog that illustrates the collection, and we present rotating exhibitions, much like the booth does here.
And they were the A&P grocery people, is that correct? Something like that?
Yeah, they run a company called Tangleman, and unfortunately we lost Mr. Haub last year, just over a year ago, and his wife, Mrs. Haub, is still active with the museum, and their children run both the Tangleman group, which at one point owned A&P Groceries here in the U.S., and they run different retailers in Europe that have been likened to the Targets of Europe. So they've had an interest in Western art ever since they started visiting the American West when they were traveling, when they were just first married, and they had established some roots in Tacoma, which led them to gift their collection to us.
So as I mentioned, the Tacoma's main contribution, in addition to being part of the exhibition team, was the book. And tell people about pulling that together and how it was like doing that.
Well, I didn't have to do any of the heavy lifting because Seth had already written his master's thesis on the subject, so we had plenty of material to cull from, which was super exciting. So we were working with University of California Press on the project, which was really exciting because they're able to distribute worldwide. And what we decided was to share many different perspectives on Warhol's work. Warhol is, as I mentioned earlier, he's a household name. Everybody knows him. Everybody has thoughts on his artwork, and so we wanted to share that through this publication. So there are 15 authors in the catalog who are writing about all of the different works that we've selected as Warhol's Western work. And I'd say that was no small feat, right, Seth? Looking through, Seth started this 16 years ago, as he said, and started researching in Warhol's extraordinary body of work. Warhol was a prolific artist and had just created hundreds and thousands of works of art. And so we culled through that, finalizing the list for the catalog and the exhibition, and then asking and inviting people to respond to that work in the catalog. So I hope you're all able to pick up the catalog and enjoy it and read some diverse perspectives on Warhol's Western work.
And talk just a little bit about your essay and maybe Heather's essay, in addition to mine, which is really just a condensed version of the thesis that kind of lays out the timeline and the facts. It's just the facts man kind of thing. And I left it to the real curators to add the insight.
Well, Seth's being, I think, too modest. His essay is incredible and gives great contextualization for this project, and it is the real brains and inspiration behind it all. And then I thought it was important to share some Native American perspectives on this work. So we invited a Native curator, Heather Atone, who wrote an essay about an indigenous perspective on Warhol's Western works. And it's a fascinating essay that explores Warhol's collection of Edward Curtis photogravures and how that relates to the portraiture that we see in Warhol's work. And then I contributed an essay that looks at Warhol's impact on Western art and how he influenced both Western artists that we know and love, as well as Native American artists, and how he has such an incredible impact on contemporary art today.
So what do you think was the most interesting fact you found out in researching this project?
There are so many interesting, fascinating things that we learned in this process. One thing that, when I was researching, one of the images in particular that I thought was fascinating to think about, there's an image that you'll see called the sunset image, and it's a beautiful print. It was Warhol's largest series. There were over 600 unique prints created in a series of a sunset, and they're just beautiful. And I read some work, some research on this image that suggests that it's perhaps an image of actually not a sunset, but a hydrogen bomb explosion that he may have seen in Time magazine. And when I read that, I thought that was a fascinating interpretation of his sunset imagery, and that it recontextualizes that image and makes me think about it in new ways. And in post-war America, when Warhol was working, and the different stresses and realities of life in that time. And so it really made me think differently about Warhol's work and the many different meanings that are behind his work. Sometimes we think that it's all celebrities and easy things to think about, but a lot of time there are a lot of nuances and more difficult subjects underneath the pictures.
Yeah, at least we didn't have to deal with death and disasters, you know.
Yes, thankfully.
That's a little depressing.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to add?
It's an incredible exhibition, so I hope you all really enjoy the chance to explore Warhol's Western work and learn a little bit more about this interesting aspect of Warhol's career.
Thank you. Faith Brower, everybody. So Faith has agreed to sit by and be Ed McMahon for the rest of the evening. And I'll bring up our next guest, Mr. Wesley Cochran, who's a collector from LaGrange, Georgia, and somebody who I got to know when I was living in LaGrange. The first real job I had out of school, which was working at a TV station in LaGrange, Georgia. And I either got fired or quit. I'm not sure, depending on which interpretation of the event, which came first. But I then started freelancing and doing some things for different media outlets in LaGrange in that area. And I was writing as a stringer for the Columbus Ledger-Inquirer newspaper. And I was sent out to do a story on this incredible art collector. And he had this huge art collection, and they wanted me to write a story about him. And I got out there and I found out he was a stonemason, and his wife was a high school teacher. And yet they had the most incredible art collection you'd ever want to see. And thus began the story that was really interesting, and it began a friendship 29 years ago. So I'd like to welcome up my friend Wesley Cochran. And Wesley's lovely wife Missy is right here in the front row. Wave to everybody. Yay. She taught high school kids how to do math. That's a very valuable thing. But Wes, tell everybody how you got started collecting art in the first place.
Wow, let's see, how much time we got? But no, we started collecting, I did right out of college in 1976. I think I graduated in 1974 from West Georgia University. And fortunate for me, I had an in-family art advisor. My mother's oldest brother, my uncle, his name was William L. May, who had been an art patron and an art collector all his life. And when I went to live with him out in Colorado after college, he had invited me to come out. So I was with him for about 6 or 7 months in Evergreen, Colorado, about 9,000 feet up on the edge of a cliff, and no TV, but a great fireplace. And I sat there and listened to him tell me his and his wife, my Aunt Carol's, 30 years of what a wonderful life they had had in collecting. And he was encouraging me to soon leave Colorado and go find myself a good job and make some money and send the money back to him. He had become, after retiring from education, he had been a collector. He had had over 1,200 pieces of, in his private collection of old master prints. He could show 500 years of printmaking from Rembrandt to Picasso. And it was just divided up into centuries, you know. His collection was so fabulous. There is a backstory to his collection. And like I said, he taught me how to put a collection together. He sort of had a way of doing it. But when Nixon was in office back in those days, in the early 70s, we were trying to establish these relations with China. And the Chinese wanted a cultural exchange to happen for the very first thing to happen in, I guess, 150 years. And they did not want it to come from, they wanted it to come from a commoner. They did not want it coming from a Mellon or a Rockefeller. So the Marlboro Galleries invited my uncle's collection to go to China. And he didn't do it. He lived to regret that, I think. But it's just, I can understand. He knew that collection would have to travel through that war zone in Vietnam. And he got very paranoid about that. And
so is that when they sent the ping pong team instead?
There's the next move is the ping pong, where we got the hell beat out of and ping pong. But before that, they had invaded his collection. It was that cohesive and that well put together. It was a well-known collection. So I had the great fortune of having him as my mentor. I mean, I majored in political science. At the same time, Watergate's going on, so it was really. But I didn't get to the art school on that side of campus, so my uncle also taught me how to build a library, and read, and get yourself educated. And if you start reaching in the hip pocket, you will get motivated to read, to find out what you're doing. So that's how we started through my uncle.
And so he advised you to go somewhere where you could make more money and not have a place to spend it.
Right. Yeah, so that's where I ended up in Bahrain, working on an offshore drilling rig for a couple of years. And that was where you could make some money, and tax-free money, if you stayed there, I think it was 518 days. You could make some money. And so that's what I did, and he was sending letters saying, send me the money. I mean, he had been in World War II, so he knew what a young man in a port town would do with a pocket full of money. Waste. So I was just so fortunate to have all this good coaching.
So you were making the equivalent of, I don't know, $100,000 a year today?
I don't think it was, no, I wish, but...
a bunch of money.
But yeah, and like I say, tax-free, and you're living on the rig, there's no expenses there.
Right.
And
so you're sending 90% of the money back to him?
Yeah.
And what was he buying with it?
Yeah, I think the very first pieces was a Calder, and actually a Romare Bearden was one of the very, very first pieces that we got. I can't hardly remember now, but I know he had gotten 15 or 20 pieces by the time I got back 2 years later. And I see it for the very first time.
And so you walk in to see what he spent your money on the last 2 years, and here's a Rauschenberg and a Jasper Johns and a Calder and Romare Bearden.
Yep. That was the first collection that we got started. You know, you just innocently start buying a piece or two, and all of a sudden you're buying 10 or so pieces a year, and all of a sudden you're getting a body of work together. You know, it's really strange how it sort of kept moving.
So you kept adding to that collection, but then at some point Warhol comes in the
Yeah, by about 1980, we started turning our attention to Warhol, which was a very logical decision for us. I talked about my uncle. We were talking about old master Prince. He was a print. That was our forte, was prints, and that's what he was saying to me. You know, you should collect prints because it's very approachable and affordable to buy prints, and it's wonderful to have original art on the walls.
Well, and the word print is the most misunderstood word in art, is it not?
I know. I guess the word graphic would be a better word. When you say print, there is misinformation that you may think of it as some kind of reproduction or whatever, as far as like we use it in photography as a print. Yeah, it is. I think if everyone were to understand the labor and the work that goes in, as you can see with the silkscreen demonstration here at the museum, it's a lot of work. It's not that easy.
So maybe handmade prints is a good term?
That's a good, yeah, there's a lot of handwork going on. That's for sure. That'd be a good way to put it.
So you asked your uncle, hey, what about this Warhol cat?
I know, yeah. Like I say, Warhol, if you want to understand Warhol, you have to study his silk screens. He's not a painter. He did some paintings, but he is a silk screen artist. And so it was very logical for us. We were print collectors. So to turn toward Warhol was a logical thing for us to do. And amazingly, as we got doing this, I mean, it's amazing how affordable Andy Warhol was. Warhol was very clever. His philosophy was low price, high volume. And you know, a lot of artists have a different approach. It's like, let's keep it scarce and we'll keep the price up. That's not Warhol's model. That's not what he did.
Andy Walmart?
Yeah, he was definitely he's using a Picasso model. He's following Pablo Picasso too. Picasso was a businessman also. But yeah, he was trying his best, I think, to become a household name. And Prince allowed him to get these out into the world, into a lot of people's hands.
Right. So you bought a few Warhols, and then you eventually came to buy the Cowboys and Indians suite, like what we have here at the museum.
Yeah, we were very fortunate to get that in 1985. My uncle had become an art broker and was helping a lot of people put collections together, and he'd somehow gotten himself into the inner circle of the Warhol crowd in New York. And so he was able to do this pre-publication price of, we put the money down on the Warhol Cowboys and Indians in 1985, early 1985. And we never got them, or they didn't come out until late 1986. So it was a year and a half or so before we ever saw it.
So they were using your money that whole time.
Yeah, I think that pre-publication was what it was for, seed money, to really get the project moving for these producers that were putting it.
And as you said, it was pretty affordable.
It was very affordable, yeah. Well, I still had to go to the bank to borrow the money to buy the 10 pieces. But that really enhanced our collection. We had about 10 or so Warhols by then, before we bought the Cowboys and Indians.
So adding 14 more than doubled the size of the collection. Yeah. And really gave you a big enough body of work to do an exhibition with if you wanted to or something.
Yeah, that was our next move. We were going to get these Cowboys and Indians, those 10 framed, and we were trying to get a catalog together. And we were wanting to take it to different museums, not for sale, but for an educational purpose, and travel it around. And we did. We started moving the Warhol collection in 1987. And it has been, I know it's been in over 50 some odd museums since we started traveling the Warhol. It's very popular.
But before that happened, you'd waited a year and a half or more for the collection. You'd gotten it, and something happened.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we were, worried, like, well, will we ever see these pieces? And we would be getting letters during this year and a half before we got them from the producers, bringing us up to date with their decisions. Are we going to do, Clint Eastwood or John Wayne, or is it going to be Geronimo or Sitting Bull? I still have all that correspondence from New York, and so we got it. And then within a few weeks of us receiving the prints, they send a letter from Warhol's crowd saying, send the John Wayne back to New York. We have this lawsuit with Patrick Wayne's estate, the John Wayne estate in California, and if you send it back up here, Warhol can artistically change this John Wayne and make it a unique instead of a numbered piece. It will not be a multiple. It will become now a one and only piece. Initially, he had done 250 John Waynes. So we sent the piece back.
Because you're assuming that's going to make it more valuable, right?
Yeah, I guess so. And of course, we were getting letters from Patrick Wayne saying, you can't sell it, you can't frame it, you can't show it, you can't do anything. And we're about to put it on the road. We're getting ready to move the Warhol show around. So, and then of course we procrastinated a little bit, but before 1986 ends, we do send it to New York for him to change. And then in February of 1987, Andy Warhol dies. And now our piece is in Andy Warhol's estate. Now, I was worried that we may never see that piece again, that it would get all trapped in there. So luckily, though, several months later, we got the John Wayne piece. Andy had changed it before he went into the hospital in February. He had our piece, the gun that John Wayne has in his hand was a very brown, you hardly notice the gun. And then when we got it back, it's fluorescent blue. So it's really more striking that way.
And on the screen, you can see where they've scrubbed out the number and replaced it with the unique.
That's right, yeah.
And so Wes and I have now debated whether the ones that didn't get sent back and have the numbers on them and are the same, however many of those are out there in the world, are those now more valuable than the uniques because of the whole deal?
I know. I don't. My cousin in New York, she had bought a set and she never sent hers back. The John Wayne back in time, so her piece is numbered. So I don't know how that would factor into it, or how many. It's hard to imagine how many, because it was just a short span before Andy Warhol died.
Right. So I know you had one other project you were hoping to do with Andy, but never came to fruition.
Oh, about trying to get a portrait done? Yeah, I did have a great fantasy of getting Andy Warhol to come to LaGrange. And if he had lived long enough, I think we could have pulled it off. But I wanted him to come and do a portrait of my uncle, who we so loved and admired. My uncle dies in 1987 also, the same year that Warhol died. And so this didn't happen, but my big plan was to get Warhol to come to LaGrange. And he would have, as long as you had a $50,000 bill. He'd come to anybody in Cartersville, I can assure you. And he could do it. He could do it every day of the week, all over the world. He did it, from Germany to Japan, everywhere. And the deal, he comes, and my uncle is there, and he takes 4, 5, 6 rows of film of the subject. And you give him $50,000, And we're only an hour away from the Atlanta airport. He's back into Atlanta and in New York eating dinner the same day with a $50,000 bill. And you get the portrait several months later, you know. But the kicker for me, we had knew about is if you did this, Warhol would do 2 portraits of my uncle. And anyone he did a portrait, they always, now he's not going to do the wife and the husband in one piece. He'll do 50 grand for her and 50 grand for him. You never, it's rarely, I have seen, but it's rare you see 2 people in one portrait. It's usually just one. But he would give you 2 for the $50,000. So I was going to try to work that out, and my uncle's daughter, my cousin in New York, I would get her to pay $25,000, and we would pay $25,000. We'd both have a portrait of my uncle. The reason Warhol did that, because he was such a tremendous businessman, he gives, you pay 50, he gives you 2 portraits. So you keep one and you walk down the street and donate it to the local museum for $50,000. You write it off. And everybody wins. And it was just beautiful.
Except the IRS.
Yeah. Yeah.
But who cares about them, right?
Right.
Until they come looking for you. Or Andy for that matter. So did you ever meet Andy?
Never really met him. I feel like in my mind I did. I happened to be working in Miami one year in 1980 before we ever bought any Warhols, and he was coming. It was all advertised of Warhol coming to Miami, University of Miami, to promote his most newest series of the 10 greatest Jews of the 20th century. And so I went that day when he was there, and I just happened to be standing by a side door like this, and he walks in, and with his, he had on I think it was a pair of dingo boots that day, with blue jeans and a little jacket, and no tie, but there was a lady right there with him, and she must have taken his photograph 500 times within 5 minutes. She was jumping on a chair and taking his picture and snap. And I just happened to be standing there, and I really got close to see him, which was a shocking sight, because he was almost albino. He had lost the pigmentation of his skin at an early age, and he had a white wig, a platinum wig, and it was just a very strange sight. I just got some really strange vibrations off of him, and I thought, wow, yeah, I need to call my uncle and see if we could get some.
So those strange vibrations said to you, this is the guy I need to buy art from.
It was something about that, I think. I sort of grew up with Warhol. I had some fringe information, I guess, about Warhol at the time. Did not know that much. But,
sure. Well, I'm sorry you never got to meet him. So I have arranged to correct that this evening. And if you will, please make a loud, raucous noise to bring out Andy Warhol. Mr. Warhol, Mr. Cochran, Mr. Cochran, Mr. Warhol.
Nice to meet you. Should be all right. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Should be all right.
I think so. So, Mr. Warhol, we are so glad to have you here on such a special occasion.
Well, just happy to be anywhere. So, what's the big deal?
We're opening an exhibition of your Western art.
Western art?
Yes, you did.
Really?
Really, we have a lot of it here.
Well, I never knew.
Who knew?
Perhaps. Did you do anything about it?
Yes, Faith and I have been doing a lot of research on it, and we wrote that book over there about your Western art.
Really? Don't you think there are enough books about me already? I mean, don't you think somebody else should be famous for 4 minutes?
4 minutes? Didn't you? Wasn't your quote everybody in the future will be famous 15 minutes?
Well, yes, but there were a lot fewer people then when I said that.
Ah.
And now, there's more people, so same time.
More people, you divide it up, it's only 4 minutes of fame. I'm sorry, folks.
And I would like to thank Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat for making that one come true.
They made you look like a prophet, didn't they?
You might say.
I'm starting to wonder, though, whether you were really Andy Warhol. Back in the day, Andy was known to sometimes send impersonators out in his place. Isn't that true, Mr. Warhol?
Well, yes, that is true, I'm afraid. See, in the beginning, I was very shy.
Only in the beginning?
More so at the beginning. And I was so busy, and I didn't want to take time to have to go and visit people when I should be making movies or art or looking for my next portrait commission.
Oh, I see. Now it comes out, the important part, the portrait commission.
Well, yes, of course. I love doing artwork, but you didn't have the money.
Why?
Why would you not?
So how do we know it's really you?
Well, I suppose I could tell you something that only I would know.
Okay, what would that be?
Wes, right? Did I not sign a napkin for you once?
Yes, that's true.
And wasn't your uncle the great art dealer William May?
That's right.
And wasn't he friends with Edmund Gaultney, who was one of the people who helped put the deal together for Cowboys and Indians?
Amazing. Wes, only Andy would know that, right?
That's true, yeah.
It must be Andy Warhol, everybody. Wes, can you tell us about getting that napkin? I'd like to hear it from your side.
Oh, okay, yeah, that was interesting. In LaGrange, I grew up, a childhood friend of mine is a guy named Fred Newman. And Fred ends up going to New York and becomes very close to Andy Warhol. I think they met at Studio 54.
Is that true, Andy?
I did meet a lot of people at Studio.
You don't kiss and tell, though, do you?
Well, Fred, they were at dinner one night with Andy, and there were other folks there at the table, and the topic of a napkin came up. Warhol had always had a black magic marker with him, and is that correct? And you did a lot of napkins.
Yes. Sign and draw.
So my friend Fred asked Andy to endorse the napkin to us. He explained to him that we were collectors of his work, and Fred, he comes back to LaGrange one time and is the keynote speaker at the annual Chamber of Commerce meeting. And so my other friend, we decided at the last moment that we should go hear Fred, because he was sort of a stand-up comedian. Fred is a gentleman, if you've ever heard of Prairie Home Companion with Garrison Keillor, the gentleman standing there that's making all those sounds is Fred Newman. He can make any sound your ear has ever heard and do it right here in front of you. Very, very talented man. So he became very famous, Fred, for doing that. But he does bring the napkin to LaGrange, and I didn't know I had no idea this was happening. So we accidentally go to this big, I don't normally go to Chamber of Commerce meetings, but.
Really?
Not really. But this was in 1983. And Fred is giving this talk, and he's very funny. And then at the end of his speech, he gets a little serious. He's talking about the New South And then he mentioned my name. We're sitting out here, there's 300 or 400 people in the audience, and I'm going, why did he say that? And he said, if Wesley's here, please come up here. I want to give him this neck. And so he presented that to me in a very generous way in front of all the townspeople. So we immediately got it framed up because it was very, very representational of Warhol and his generosity. He did this 7,000 or 10,000 times. Oh, a lot of these big celebrities have napkins.
Right.
Ostrom and all them.
Right.
He did that a lot. So we thought it'd be interesting to have it in our show to display.
Absolutely. So, Andy, back to you. You said you didn't really realize you had done Western art, but if you think about it, you did with Elvis and Russell Means and the Cowboys and Indians series that you did. Those are all Western. Where do you think the idea to do anything Western might have come from in the beginning?
Well, that's an easy one. See, one of my favorite memories from my childhood was going to the movies on Saturdays. So my mother would give me a quarter, and I could go all day and have a Coke, popcorn, and Westerns were really popular back then. And everybody loved Roy Rogers and Gene Autry. Back then, they were two of my favorites.
That's interesting. And you also like to travel out west, I understand.
Yes, I love to visit Texas and Mexico, in particular Colorado because I have some property there. We'd love to go skiing and snowmobiling.
Can you imagine Andy snowmobiling? Faith actually has some pictures of you snowmobiling.
It's fun. Have you tried it?
Yes,
That you should know.
I do. I just can't picture you doing it. I can picture you more in Texas. I understand you like Texas a lot.
I did. In fact, I love Texas and I love Texans. Whenever a Texan would make a lot of money, they'd go do whatever it was they always wanted to, without worrying about what anybody thought.
Isn't that kind of what you did?
You might say.
In fact, I had read somewhere that you said if there ever was an Andy Warhol museum, you did not want it to be in your hometown of Pittsburgh. You had a location picked out in Texas.
I always thought that Houston would make a better place for a museum. But more like a store than a museum. It should be like a Neiman Marcus.
So the Neiman Marcus Andy Warhol Museum in Houston, Texas.
Well, you have to pay for that, but sure.
Well, you have to pay for everything with you.
Of course.
Business art, right?
Business art. Best.
Well, you also loved Indian art too, didn't you?
Yes, in fact, I've always believed that American art, the true, real, best American art, is Native American art, especially from women. They had such intricate patterns in their rugs and in their blankets. And the best part is it didn't matter who did it. Because they were into modern art way before the rest of us.
In fact, on that point, Teddy Roosevelt said, after he visited the Armory Show in 1913, where the first big show of modern art in America, he came out, and they asked him, "What did you think, Mr. President?" He said, "I got more good modern art at home in one Navajo blanket than I do in that whole building." So, Andy, maybe you're onto something there. At least you agree with President Roosevelt. So do you think your interest in the movies and the travel and the Indian art and all those things culminated in the work that you did on Cowboys and Indians, the last big thing you did?
Yes, all of that. The movies, my collection of Indian artifacts, my love of movies, they were really in my mind when I accepted this really important commissioned work. But I won't lie, the money also had a lot to do major project I did before I passed, so that was very important. But the money had to be right also. Remember what you said about business art?
Yes.
See, for me, I always thought business art was the best art, because I always thought whatever artist had the most money must be the best.
That's a little different concept than art for art's sake, isn't it? Wesley, you got a thought about that?
Yeah, I know. I think Warhol always did say he thought the finest form of art was a successful businessman. That you couldn't get any better than that.
That's right. So, Andy, I'm wondering, now that you've kind of passed and come back through the miracle of the Back to the Future machine we have back in the back here, you always did your portraits from Polaroids, but it's got to be getting pretty hard to find that film these days. Are you still working with Polaroids, or have you made the jump over to the iPhone?
Well, I always like having a camera of any kind with me at all times, just because I always want to be ready if something or somebody suddenly pops up. But yes, the Polaroid was always my favorite. In fact, maybe I can take a Polaroid of you three.
Oh, wow. How about that?
We're going to have to get a little closer together. And 3, 2, 1.
All right, Wes, that's $50,000. Pay him. Ladies and gentlemen, Andy Warhol, Wes Cochran, Dave Brower. I have time for just a couple of quick questions if anybody has one. Anybody have a question for any of the panelists? Anybody? Okay, great. Oh, what? Go ahead.
How was it get packaged when your works came to like the Cowboys and Indians? Like how was it packaged? Like I was just like wondering.
They came all flat, and I still have the case. I think actually, I think it was it's a wooden box that about that thick. And so all the pieces are 36 inches by 36 inches. So they were in there, and there was a nice frontal piece that lists all the pieces and the origins, I guess, origins of where those pieces came from.
The source images.
Yeah, I still have that. I've never framed it, but it's still in the box.
Yeah, so that the technical term for that is a colophon, and in the gallery where all the Cowboys and Indians images are, there's a copy of that up on the wall, and it lists how many of each one they made and what the source images were and so on, and that's what Wes is referring to. Yes, sir.
Did Andy Warhol end up wealthy?
Did Andy Warhol end up wealthy?
He left here with over $400 million. He was the most successful artist, money-wise, we probably ever produced.
Hence the best.
And the best.
That 10-day auction that we talked about up in the exhibition, I think the gross on that was about 30 million or something, and that was selling cookie jars and Indian artifacts, and he was not the most connoisseurish collector who ever lived, and to sell that for that amount of money was pretty incredible. All right, one more. Yes, ma'am.
My question is if you still actively collect prints or lithographs, and if so, how do you choose upcoming artists, and if so, what do you look for?
Well, that's not exactly what we've been doing. We didn't really do young emerging artists. We had another formula. We sort of waited until the artist was maybe mid-career, and that's when we would jump on the wagon, sort of. So we're not as actively collecting now that I've retired, but occasionally we still are trying to strengthen the collection, and we'll get a piece.
And tell them about the change of direction you went in '87.
Oh yeah, 87, 88, we decided to focus on African American art. And so since then, the last 30 so years, we have mainly, all our purchases have been on African American art. We have a lot of contacts in that world, mainly up and down the East Coast. There's some Western California artists we've collected, but so that's what we've been focusing on.
And when I went to write that article, that's what they sent me to do, was to write about their collecting in the works in paper by African American artists. And you know, here's Wesley, the stonemason and the high school teacher, having one of the best collections of African American works on paper in the entire world. And it was like, what's up with that? Where did that come from? And that was the bulk of the contents of that article.
Well, yeah, don't believe the myth. Collecting is not reserved for the wealthy few.
Right.
Anyone could stake a claim in this if you so desire. It's not that hard to do.
Especially if you pick a niche.
Yeah, exactly. Or if you think about works on paper, drawings or prints and watercolors, it makes it much more approachable.
Not having kids in college helps too.
Yeah, we never had any children, so.
But your art collection is your children.
They are our children, yes.
Absolutely. And we want to publicly thank you for sharing those with so many places around this country that wouldn't have gotten to see shows of any of that kind of work without that collection being available.
Well, thank you.